I never expected the woman who spent 8 years pretending I did not exist to call me and say the words I had once dreamed of hearing. Clara, we need you. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I was wrong. Not, I miss my daughter. Just 3 words that told me everything I needed to know. I was standing in the parking lot of Bennett Furniture on a cold Tuesday morning, staring at the building where I had spent most of my 20s, trying to prove I belonged. The old brick walls looked exactly the same. The faded wooden sign above the entrance still carried my father's name. But the company behind that sign was falling apart. Employees walked out carrying boxes. A supplier's truck pulled away from the loading dock. The same place where I had once worked 12-hour days now looked like a memory that was slowly disappearing. And inside that building was my mother, Evelyn Bennett, waiting for me. 8 years earlier, she had watched me leave and told me something I never forgot. You were never meant to run this company, Clara. Now, at 38 years old, she was asking me to save it. What she didn't know was that I already understood why the business was failing. What she didn't know was that I had spent 8 years building a life without their approval. What she didn't know was that if I walked through those doors again, I would not be the same daughter who left. Because this time, I had one condition. Before I tell you what that condition was, I want to share the part of my story that people often misunderstand. Sometimes walking away from family is not about anger. Sometimes it is the only way you can hear your own voice again. If you have ever been the person your family only noticed when they needed something, or if you have ever felt like you were fighting for a place at a table where everyone else already had a seat, I hope you stay with me until the end. Because this story was not really about a business. It was about what happens when the person everyone underestimates finally stops asking for permission to matter. I looked at my phone again. The message from my mother was still there. Please come inside. We need to discuss the future of the company. The word future almost made me laugh. For years, I had tried to help create that future. For years, they acted like I was only useful when there was a problem to fix. But to understand why that phone call changed everything, I have to take you back to where it all started. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, inside a family that everyone believed was successful, close, and built on love. The truth was much more complicated. My father, Richard Bennett, built Bennett Furniture from a small workshop into a respected local manufacturing company. He started with old equipment, long nights, and a belief that hard work could create something lasting. When people looked at our family, they saw a legacy. They saw photographs of my father shaking hands with customers, awards hanging on office walls, and generations of employees who had worked beside him. But inside our home, I learned something different. I learned that love could come with conditions. I was the oldest child, and from a young age, I was the responsible one. I remembered birthdays. I finished my homework without being asked. I helped my parents whenever they needed something. My younger brother Lucas was different. Lucas was charming, confident, easy to like. He could walk into a room and make everyone feel like he belonged there. My father loved that about him. My mother loved it even more. She often said Lucas had natural leadership. I never understood what that meant. Because when I looked at leadership, I saw responsibility. I saw showing up when things were difficult. I saw staying late when employees needed help. I saw solving problems nobody else wanted to handle, and those were the things I did. While Lucas learned how to impress people, I learned how the business actually worked. After school, I spent hours inside my father's furniture workshop. I learned inventory systems. I helped organize customer orders. I watched how my father negotiated with suppliers and handled employees. The smell of fresh-cut wood became something familiar to me. The sound of machines running in the back room felt like home. I thought one day my family would see what I was building. I thought effort eventually became recognition. I was wrong. Because even then, before I understood the full pattern, something had already started happening. I was becoming the person everyone depended on, but not the person anyone celebrated. And I did not know yet that this difference would eventually cost me my family. The first time I realized my family had already decided what my place was, I was 26 years old. I had just finished organizing a difficult supplier negotiation that saved Bennett Furniture thousands of dollars. One of our largest material suppliers had threatened to increase prices because of delayed payments. I spent 3 weeks reviewing invoices, finding errors, and creating a payment plan that kept the relationship alive. I remember walking into my father's office that Friday afternoon with the folder in my hands. "I fixed the supplier issue," I said. "They agreed to keep our original pricing." My father looked proud for a moment. "That's my girl," he said quietly. For a second, I felt something I had been waiting for my entire life: recognition. But before I could enjoy that moment, Lucas walked in. He had just returned from a business lunch. My mother immediately turned toward him. "Lucas, everyone was asking about your ideas for expanding the company." I stood there, holding the folder, while the conversation changed completely. Nobody asked about the supplier agreement. Nobody asked how I solved the problem. The work disappeared the moment Lucas entered the room. That became the pattern. I was the person who fixed things behind the scenes. Lucas was the person who received credit when things looked good. At family dinners, relatives would ask him about the future of Bennett Furniture. They would say things like, "Your father must be so proud. One day this will all be yours." I would sit there quietly, knowing I had spent years learning every part of that business. I knew which machines needed maintenance. I knew which employees were struggling. I knew which customers were unhappy before they complained. But somehow, knowledge did not matter as much as being the son everyone expected to lead. My mother never directly told me she valued Lucas more. She did something worse. She made me feel unreasonable for noticing. Whenever I brought up concerns, she would sigh and say, "Clara, not everything is a competition." But it always felt like I was the only person not allowed to compete. When Lucas made mistakes, everyone protected him. When I made small mistakes, they became proof that I was too emotional or too difficult. I remember one Christmas dinner when my aunt asked why I was still working so much at the company without having a leadership title. Before I could answer, my mother smiled and said, "Clara has always been better at helping than managing." Everyone laughed. Even though she said it casually, I felt the words settle inside me. Helping. That was the role they had created for me. Useful, reliable, invisible. The hardest part was that I kept hoping things would change. Especially after my father became sick. When his health started declining, I thought maybe he would finally see what I had been trying to prove all those years. The company needed someone who understood every detail, someone who cared about protecting what he built. I believed that person was me. But while I was preparing reports, meeting suppliers, and trying to keep the business stable, decisions were being made about my future without me. And when my mother finally announced who would lead Bennett Furniture after my father stepped back, I realized something that changed the way I saw my entire family. The person who had always been there to save them was the person they were willing to leave behind. I remember the day clearly. It was a Monday morning. Rain was hitting the windows of the conference room where my father's old wooden table sat. My mother, Lucas, and I were sitting there. Lucas looked excited. Almost too excited. My mother folded her hands and said, "Your father and I have decided Lucas should represent the company moving forward." I looked at her. I honestly thought I had misunderstood. "What does that mean?" I asked. She avoided my eyes. "It means Lucas will become the face of Bennett Furniture." I waited for her to explain. I waited for someone to mention the years I had spent there, the problems I solved, the knowledge I had built. Nothing came. Then Lucas said something I still remember. "I think people naturally trust a leader who looks confident." That sentence hurt, because I understood what he was really saying. He was not talking about business. He was talking about me, about the way they saw me. Too quiet, too serious, too much of a worker, not enough of a leader. I asked my mother privately why my efforts meant so little. Her response was the one that finally broke something inside me. "You are good at fixing things, Clara. Lucas is good at leading people." I nodded. I did not argue. I did not cry. I just realized that I had spent years trying to earn a position in a place where they had already decided I did not belong. After that day, everything changed. I still worked. I still helped. But something inside me stopped hoping. Then came the moment when Lucas's decisions started damaging the company. Orders were delayed. Customers complained. Expenses increased. And somehow, instead of admitting he needed help, the family turned toward me. They wanted me to support him. They wanted me to fix problems they refused to acknowledge. I remember looking at my mother and saying, "You didn't want me to lead. You wanted me to clean up." She became angry. She said I was being selfish. She said family members should help each other. But I finally understood something. Helping someone who respects you is love. Helping someone who only values what you provide is exhaustion. That night, I packed my things. I left Bennett Furniture. I left the house where I grew up, and I stopped answering calls. For the first few months, I expected someone to come after me. I expected my father to call. I expected my mother to apologize. I expected Lucas to realize what he had lost. But days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. 8 years passed, and during those 8 years, they believed I had walked away because I was angry. They never considered that I walked away because I was finally choosing myself. What they did not know was that leaving Bennett Furniture was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of the life I built without them. When I moved away, I had very little. One suitcase, a small apartment, a used car that made strange noises every time I started it, and a determination I did not even know I had. I did not tell my family about my plans. I did not announce my progress. I did not post pictures trying to prove I was doing better. I became quiet, and in that quiet, I rebuilt myself. I started working in business operations consulting. At first, I took small projects: a struggling local manufacturer, a family-owned store with inventory problems, a company that needed someone to organize systems nobody understood. Slowly, people started noticing what my family ignored. I had a talent for seeing problems before they became disasters. The same skills they called helping became the reason companies hired me. Within a few years, I was leading projects, advising business owners, and building a reputation completely separate from the Bennett name. I became the person I always was. I just stopped waiting for my family to recognize it. But there was one thing from Bennett Furniture I never forgot. Before I left, I had noticed financial issues inside the company. I noticed unusual decisions. I noticed warning signs. I saved copies of emails, reports, and records because something inside me knew those details might matter someday. Not because I wanted revenge, because I knew the truth mattered. And years later, when my mother finally called me after 8 years of silence, she had no idea that the daughter she thought had walked away had spent those years becoming the one person who could actually save everything. 8 years can change a person. That was something I learned after leaving Bennett Furniture. When I first walked away, I thought distance would erase the pain. I thought if I stopped hearing my mother's disappointment and stopped watching Lucas receive everything I had worked for, I would eventually stop caring. But the truth was different. Distance does not erase memories. It simply gives you enough space to understand them. For years, I carried the question that many people who leave difficult families carry. Was I wrong for walking away? I asked myself that more times than I want to admit. That was why meeting Margaret Hayes mattered so much. Margaret had been my father's business attorney for almost 20 years. She was not a relative, but she was one of the few people who had watched my entire story unfold without pretending everything was fine. I first met her when I was 23. At that time, I was still working at Bennett Furniture, staying late in the office while everyone else had already gone home. Margaret would often stop by to review contracts with my father, and she noticed things other people ignored. She noticed that I understood the business. She noticed that I remembered details. She noticed that employees came to me when they needed answers. One evening, while we were organizing old supplier agreements, she looked at me and said, "Clara, you know this company better than most people who claim they run it." I laughed because I did not believe her. I thought she was just being kind. I had spent so many years hearing what I could not do that I had forgotten to consider what I could. After I left Ohio, Margaret respected my decision. She never called to convince me to return. She never told me I owed my family another chance. That was one reason I trusted her. She understood something my family did not. Love does not mean forcing someone to stay where they are constantly hurt. So when I received the message from the family attorney 8 years later, Margaret was the first person I contacted. We met at her law office on a quiet Thursday afternoon. The office smelled like old books and coffee. There were shelves filled with legal files, framed certificates on the walls, and a large wooden desk covered with neatly organized folders. I sat across from her, waiting for the conversation I knew was coming. Margaret looked at me for a moment before speaking. "Clara, before we talk about the company, I need you to understand something." I nodded. "Your father believed in you." Those words affected me more than I expected, because they were the words I had wanted to hear from him when he was alive. I looked down at my hands. "Then why didn't he say anything?" Margaret was quiet, and sometimes silence tells you more than an answer. "He was afraid of conflict," she finally said. "He loved you, but he avoided difficult decisions. He thought time would fix things." I swallowed hard. Time had fixed some things, but it had also taken 8 years away from me. Margaret opened a folder, but did not hand it over immediately. "There are documents connected to the future of Bennett Furniture." My heart started beating faster. "What kind of documents?" She looked at me carefully. "Documents your family never discussed with you." For a moment, I felt the old emotions return. Anger, sadness, confusion. But underneath all of that was something else. Clarity. Margaret explained that before my father's health declined, he had started preparing a succession plan for the company. He knew the business needed stability, and he knew leadership could not simply be based on who was more comfortable in public. He wanted the person who understood the foundation of what he built. Me. But Margaret also warned me. "Clara, having proof does not mean going back will be easy." I looked at her. "I know." "No," she said gently. "I don't think you do. Your mother and Lucas are not calling because they suddenly understand your value. They are calling because they have reached a point where they need something from you." That sentence stayed with me, because deep down, I already knew she was right. For 8 years, nobody had asked how I was. Nobody had wondered if I was happy. Nobody had tried to repair what happened. But suddenly, when the company was in trouble, my phone rang. The question was not whether I could help. The question was whether helping them meant losing myself again. Margaret leaned back in her chair. "You do not have to save something that destroyed you." I looked out the window. I thought about my father. I thought about the employees who depended on that company. I thought about the younger version of myself, who spent years trying to prove she belonged. "I need to see what is happening there," I finally said. Margaret nodded. "Then go. But go as the woman you became, not the daughter they expected you to remain." That was the first time I realized returning home did not mean going backward. Maybe I was not returning to ask for a place. Maybe I was returning to decide whether they deserved one more chance. A few days later, I drove back to Bennett Furniture. The building looked smaller than I remembered. The same front doors, the same parking lot, the same sign above the entrance. But I was different. Inside, employees recognized me. Some looked surprised, some looked uncomfortable. They remembered me. They remembered who actually kept things running. And then I saw my mother. Evelyn Bennett stood near the conference room entrance, wearing the same pearl necklace she wore to every important family event. She smiled. But it was not the smile of a mother who missed her daughter. It was the smile of someone welcoming back a solution. "Clara," she said. "Just my name. Nothing more. No apology. No acknowledgement of the years." I walked inside. Lucas was already sitting at the conference table. He stood up confidently. "Glad you finally decided to come back." Finally, that word bothered me, because it suggested I had been the one keeping us apart. I sat down across from him. My mother placed a folder on the table. "We need your help." I looked at both of them. 8 years ago, I would have been desperate for those words. Now, I heard something different. A request, not recognition. A need, not love. And as they started explaining the company's problems, I realized something important. They still did not understand who had walked back into that room. They thought they were calling the same Clara who left. They had no idea she was gone. The first thing I noticed when I walked back into Bennett Furniture was that everything looked almost exactly the same. The framed photographs still covered the hallway walls. My father's awards were still displayed near the reception desk. The old wooden conference table, where I had spent countless evenings reviewing numbers and solving problems, was still sitting in the same place. But the feeling was different. Because 8 years earlier, I had walked out of that building feeling like I had lost. Now I understood something I did not understand back then. I had not lost my place. I had escaped a place that never wanted to give me one. The meeting started with my mother explaining the situation. She opened a folder filled with financial reports and placed them in front of me. "We are facing some temporary challenges," Evelyn said. Temporary? That was the word people used when they did not want to admit something was serious. I looked through the documents. Declining sales, supplier complaints, employee turnover, late payments. These were not temporary problems. They were symptoms. The company was not struggling because of one bad month. It was struggling because years of poor decisions had finally become impossible to hide. Lucas leaned forward. "We just need someone who understands operations," he said. I looked at him. Someone. Not a leader, not a decision maker. Someone who could fix the mess. The same role I had always been given. I calmly asked, "What authority would I have if I came back?" The room became quiet. My mother looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if I am responsible for fixing the company, who makes the final decisions?" Lucas smiled slightly. "Clara, this is not the time to focus on titles." I almost smiled. Because I had heard that sentence before. Whenever they wanted my effort without my voice, they called titles unnecessary. "This is about family," my mother added. That sentence had followed me my entire life. Family. It had been used to ask me for sacrifices, to silence questions, to make me feel guilty for wanting fairness. I looked at the two people sitting across from me. 8 years ago, their words would have made me doubt myself. This time, they only confirmed what I already knew. They wanted my skills, but they were not ready to respect my value. I asked to review the current ownership documents and financial records. My mother immediately became uncomfortable. "Clara, we do not need to make this complicated." That response told me more than any document could have. If everything was clear, questions would not be a problem. I closed the folder. "I need time to think." Lucas looked confused. "I thought you wanted to help." "I do," I said. "But helping and surrendering are not the same thing." Neither of them responded. I left the meeting with a feeling I had never experienced with my family before. Peace, not because everything was solved, but because I finally stopped trying to convince people to see me. A few days later, Evelyn called again. This time her voice sounded more emotional. "We are having the company anniversary celebration this weekend," she said. "It would mean a lot if you came." I hesitated. "Why?" There was a pause. "Because people need to know the family is together again." That sentence stayed with me. The family was not together. They wanted it to look like we were, and there was a difference, but I agreed to attend. Part of me wanted to believe there was still a chance for honesty. Maybe my mother would finally acknowledge what happened. Maybe Lucas would finally understand. Maybe this could be a new beginning. I should have known better. The event was held at a local banquet hall decorated with photographs from Bennett Furniture's history. Employees, suppliers, relatives, and community members filled the room. There were round tables covered with white tablecloths. Small place cards sat beside folded napkins. A large banner behind the stage read, "Celebrating the Bennett family legacy." I stood near the entrance wearing a simple navy dress, watching people congratulate my family. For a moment, I felt like the old Clara again, the daughter waiting to be invited in. Then Lucas walked onto the stage. The room applauded. My mother stood beside him. She smiled proudly. "Tonight," she announced, "we celebrate the person who will continue my husband's legacy." I felt my stomach tighten, because I already knew what was coming. Lucas Bennett. The applause grew louder. Lucas accepted the microphone. "I know my father would be proud that we are keeping the company in the family." Keeping it in the family? The words sounded harmless, but I knew what they meant. They meant keeping me in the background. My mother then looked toward me. "And we are grateful that Clara has returned to support us during this important transition." Support us. Not lead, not rebuild. Support. The room applauded again. People smiled at me. Some even congratulated me. But nobody understood what those words meant. They were introducing me as help. After 8 years. After everything I had built. After everything I had sacrificed, I was still being presented as the person who came back to fix someone else's mistake. I forced myself to stay calm. I did not react. I did not give them the emotional scene they might have expected, because something inside me had finally changed. I was no longer trying to win their approval. I was watching them reveal themselves. And then, just when I thought the night could not become more painful, Lucas took the microphone again. I think the best thing for the company is for me to continue as CEO while Clara helps with operations. The room applauded, and in that moment, I understood exactly why they had brought me back. Not because they believed in me, because they believed I would accept anything. After all these years, they still thought I was the same woman who left. They were about to learn they were wrong. The room was still applauding when I realized something that changed the way I saw my entire family. They were not embarrassed by what they had done. They were proud of it. That hurt more than the betrayal itself, because I had spent 8 years wondering if maybe I had been too sensitive. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe time had made the memories feel worse than they actually were. But standing there in that banquet hall, surrounded by people celebrating a version of the story that erased me, I finally understood. I had not imagined it. I had lived it. I watched Lucas step away from the microphone while relatives gathered around him, congratulating him on becoming the future of Bennett Furniture. One of my father's old suppliers, a man named Robert, approached me quietly. "Clara," he said, lowering his voice, "I didn't know you were coming back." I smiled politely. "Neither did I. Until recently." He looked uncomfortable. "I hope you know, some of us remember who kept this place running." That sentence almost broke my composure, because it was the first time that night someone acknowledged the truth. I thanked him. Then I walked away before my emotions could take over. A few minutes later, my mother found me near the hallway outside the main room. She looked concerned, not because I was hurt, because she was afraid I would react. "Clara," she whispered, "please don't make tonight difficult." I looked at her. "Difficult for who?" She sighed. "You know what I mean." "No, Mom, I don't." She glanced toward the crowd. "Your father would want the family to stand together." There it was again, my father's name being used as a reason for me to stay quiet. I looked at the woman who had spent years telling me I needed to understand everyone else's feelings. For the first time, I wondered if she had ever tried to understand mine. "I came here because I wanted to believe things had changed," I said. Her expression softened slightly. "Things can change if you let them." I shook my head. "That only works if people admit what happened." She did not answer. And that silence told me everything. I left the event before the speeches ended. I did not cry in the parking lot. That surprised me. 8 years ago, I would have been devastated. I would have wondered what was wrong with me. This time, I just felt tired. Not angry, not defeated. Tired. Because I finally accepted that some people do not misunderstand your value. They understand it perfectly. They just benefit from pretending it is smaller than it is. When I reached my car, my phone vibrated. It was Margaret. "Did you make a decision?" I stared at the message for a moment. Then I replied, "Not yet." A few seconds later, another message appeared. "Then come to my office tomorrow. There is something you need to see." The next morning, I sat across from Margaret again. This time, there were more folders on the desk. Thicker folders. Older folders. The kind that carried years of hidden conversations. Margaret placed a large envelope in front of me. "Clara, before you decide whether to help your family, you need to know the full truth about your father's plans." I slowly opened the envelope. Inside were legal documents, company records, and signed agreements. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. Then I saw my father's signature. My hands became still. "What is this?" Margaret took a breath. "This is the succession agreement Richard created before his health declined." I looked at her. "Succession agreement?" She nodded. "Your father knew Bennett Furniture needed a clear leadership structure. He knew the company could not survive based only on tradition or family expectations." I looked back at the documents. My name was there. Not Lucas's. Mine. For a moment, I could not speak. Because this was not about winning. It was not about proving my brother wrong. It was about something much deeper. My father had seen me. He had known. Even if he had failed to protect me when it mattered most, he had understood what I was capable of. Margaret continued. He wanted you to have a controlling role in the company's future. I looked away. A strange mixture of emotions filled me. Relief, sadness, anger, all at once. Then why didn't anyone tell me? Margaret was quiet. Because after your father passed, your mother and Lucas chose the easier story. The easier story? That you left, that you abandoned the company, that Lucas was the natural choice. I looked down at the documents. 8 years. 8 years of believing I had been rejected because I was not enough. But the truth was different. I had been pushed away because accepting me would have forced them to admit they were wrong. Margaret then showed me something else. Emails, reports, messages I had written years earlier warning the family about financial problems, my old recommendations, my old concerns, my old attempts to protect the company, ignored. Every single one. I kept copies because I knew someday the truth might matter, Margaret said. I nodded slowly. Now I understood. The proof was not just that I deserved leadership. The proof was that I had been trying to save the company long before they asked me to come back. Margaret folded her hands. Clara, you have options. You can walk away. You can sell your interest. You can let them deal with the consequences. I looked at the documents. Then I thought about the employees, the people who had nothing to do with my family's choices. I thought about my father. And I thought about the younger version of myself, who spent years trying to prove she belonged. I finally knew what I wanted, but it was not what my mother expected. I would return. I would help, but not as the daughter they could call whenever they needed a rescue. I would return with a condition. And this time, they would have to decide whether they wanted the company saved badly enough to finally respect me. The next morning, I walked into Bennett Furniture's conference room, carrying the folder Margaret had given me. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like to finally show my family the truth. I thought I would feel angry. I thought I would feel powerful. But as I sat there across from my mother and Lucas, I felt something completely different. Calm. Because I was no longer there to convince them that I deserved respect. I already knew I did. Lucas leaned back in his chair. So, are we moving forward? I looked at him. The confidence in his voice almost reminded me of the old days. The days when he believed everything would always work out because someone else would handle the difficult parts. My mother smiled. We knew you would understand, Clara. This family needs each other. I placed the folder on the table. I do understand. They both looked at me. I understand exactly what happened. I opened the folder. The first document I placed in front of them was the succession agreement. Lucas's expression changed immediately. My mother picked up the paper. What is this? The agreement Dad created before his health declined. Silence filled the room. Lucas looked confused. That doesn't make sense. It does, I said calmly. You just were never supposed to see this part of the story. Margaret joined us through the meeting and confirmed the documents were legitimate. She explained that my father had created a legal plan based on business knowledge, not family expectations. The room became uncomfortable, because suddenly, the daughter they had described as someone who walked away was sitting there with proof that she had been the person my father trusted most. Lucas looked at the papers again. So you're saying Dad wanted you to run the company? I looked at him. No. I paused. He wanted the company to be led by someone prepared to protect it. That difference mattered, because this was never about replacing Lucas. It was about acknowledging reality. My mother immediately became defensive. Clara, your father loved both of you. I know. Then why are you making this about what happened years ago? I looked at her. Because what happened years ago is why this company is struggling today. Nobody spoke. I continued. I warned you. I showed you the problems. I tried to help before I left. I placed the old reports and emails on the table. These are the messages I sent. These are the concerns I raised. These are the things nobody wanted to hear. Lucas looked through them quietly. For the first time in my life, he did not have an answer. Because the evidence did not need an argument. It simply existed. My mother whispered, "We were trying to protect the family." I nodded slowly. That is what you always said. I looked around the room. But protecting a family does not mean sacrificing one person so everyone else can stay comfortable. That was the moment everything changed. Not because I shouted, not because I attacked them, but because I finally stopped carrying the responsibility of making them understand. I took a breath. I will help rebuild Bennett Furniture. My mother looked relieved. Then I finished. But I have one condition. The relief disappeared. If I stay with full decision-making authority. No more pretending I am only here to clean up problems. No more using my work while ignoring my voice. And Lucas will not continue making decisions without professional oversight. Lucas immediately reacted. You're trying to take control. I looked at him. No, I'm refusing to accept responsibility without authority. The room went quiet. That sentence explained everything I had felt for years. They wanted the benefits of my ability without respecting the person behind it. My mother looked down. For the first time, I saw uncertainty on her face. Because the daughter who used to accept everything was gone, I did not need their permission anymore. The following months were difficult. Saving Bennett Furniture was not like those movies, where one person walks in and fixes everything overnight. There were no magical solutions. There were meetings, difficult conversations, supplier negotiations, employee concerns, financial reviews, mistakes that needed to be corrected. But slowly, things started improving. Employees who had once avoided difficult conversations began trusting the process. Suppliers who had lost confidence began working with us again. The company did not become perfect. It became honest, and that was something it had not been for a long time. Lucas struggled the most. For years, he had believed leadership was about being seen. He slowly learned that leadership was about responsibility. Eventually, he apologized. Not perfectly, not dramatically. But honestly, I thought you were trying to take something from me, he said one afternoon. I looked at him. And now? He looked around the office. Now I think you were trying to save something I didn't know how to protect. It was the first honest conversation we had ever had. With my mother, things were harder. Months after the company stabilized, she started sending messages. I miss you. I want my daughter back. I wish we could forget everything. I read every message, but I did not rush. Because forgiveness does not mean pretending nothing happened. Eventually, I agreed to meet her for coffee. She looked older. Smaller, not like the powerful person who once controlled every conversation. She reached across the table. I know I made mistakes. I nodded. But Mom, mistakes are when you forget an appointment or say the wrong thing. She looked at me. What I experienced was a pattern. Her eyes filled with tears. I was trying to protect the family. I smiled sadly. I know. And that was the hardest part. I knew she believed that. But good intentions do not erase damage. I told her I did not hate her. I told her I hoped she found peace. But I also told her I could not return to the relationship we had before. Because the old relationship required me to disappear, and I was not willing to disappear anymore. 1 year after returning to Bennett Furniture, I stood inside the same conference room where I had once been told I was not the right person to lead. The same table, the same chairs, the same walls. But I was different. I was leading a company meeting. Employees were asking for my opinion. They trusted my decisions. They respected my voice. And for the first time, I realized something important. The greatest thing I had gained was not ownership. It was freedom. For years, I thought my family had taken something from me. My confidence, my place, my future. But they had accidentally given me something else. The chance to build a life where I did not have to beg anyone to see my value. If you have ever been the person your family only noticed when they needed help, I hope my story reminds you of something. Your worth is not created by the people who recognize it. Your worth exists before anyone else sees it. Sometimes walking away is not giving up. Sometimes walking away is how you finally find yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. If this reminded you of something you have experienced, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories about healing, boundaries, and finding strength after betrayal, subscribe for more. Because the truth is, the hardest thing I ever did was leave the place where I wanted to belong. But the best thing I ever did was build a place where I finally did.